Okay, we are now recording, and I want to give a very big and warm welcome to Rabbi Yonah Grossman, who is giving the class today all the way from North Dakota, a place to which I've never visited or been, and I suspect many of us are in that same boat. Rabbi Grossman, thank you so much for joining us, and I'm going to put the spotlight on you.
Sure. Thank you very much. Thank you, Rabbi Jaworowski, for the welcome. I will begin by pointing out that Rabbi Jaworowski was actually a teacher of mine many years ago. And
very fond memories.
I attended Yeshiva High School in New York. And yeah, it's very fond memories from then. Okay, I'm going to try to share my screen right now, because what I have to share is mainly pictures, and I'll talk about the pictures as we go through them. And I tried to order these properly, but I couldn't figure out the technology. So I guess we'll just have to bear with me as I put up the pictures and take them down. North Dakota has a very fascinating Jewish history. It's one of the larger states, although by far not the largest, and one of the smallest populations in the Union, and that's nothing new. But what's interesting is, and hopefully we'll cover the gamut of North Dakota Jewish history from its inception until today, loosely, bits and pieces, by no means comprehensive. One of the interesting things for me when I started looking into the North Dakota Jewish history, and I realized that it didn't go very far back. It went, into the, the 1870s earliest, and I figured, that's not so far back, and it didn't take me much longer to realize that's about as old as there have been anyone other than the natives in the area. And so North Dakota Jewish history goes back as far as the other white settled history in the state, but that's some about 150 years. That's it. Number of very colorful figures that have passed through, a number of very Jewish stats and figures. The Jewish people that first started coming to North Dakota came as homesteaders. You had the Homestead Act, which provided land for free for those who would work the land, or for a meager sum for those who would work the land for a number of years. And this particularly interested a number of Jewish people for a very interesting reason. And it seems to be a common theme in the different diaries that are read. In the old country, in Russia, Jewish settlement was limited to the Pale of Jewish settlement, which was a relatively small area for many, many years. And Jews were not allowed to own land, even in those areas. So a lot of the old Yiddish stories, the Hamish stories of the tzaddikim and the Jewish communities, you always had the paritz, the landowner, and they would always be leasing the tavern, or they'd be leasing the fields from the paritz, the landowner. Why were they always leasing the land? Because they weren't allowed to own it themselves. So here they came to the Golden Medina, the golden country of America, and all of a sudden they heard there was an opportunity to own land. Now, mind you, many of them did not have much experience farming. And by the time they came, a lot of them didn't get the choicest fields because they'd already been chosen by people who came before them. And so there was the Jewish homesteading enterprise was at a unique disadvantage, and it didn't last very long, although there were some who stuck it out till the very end. But there were a number of different homesteading colonies around the state of North Dakota that were initiated by some of the different organizations that were trying to bring Jewish immigrants into the United States and had to show that they could give them jobs. So here you have a couple of pictures, which I'll show you, which for me are fascinating. If you can see it's not hard to see very clearly, but if you'll notice in the back of this mud hut, which is is a picture of the Schwartz family living in a mud hut in Jewish, North Dakota homestead. You'll notice in the background there are no trees, and that's really what the North Dakota landscape looked like in the mid 19th century. There was it was literally one big meadow, if you may, one big plain. And nowadays, when you drive through North Dakota, you don't see that. Now you see a lot of the trees that were planted by different farmers, and whatnot, in order to block the snow from blowing. Here is, again, you see no trees in the background. This is the Kaloff family. The Kaloff family, a very interesting life. Rachel Kaloff actually wrote a diary in Yiddish, to be sure. It was later translated, or parts of it were translated and published in English. I still have not had an opportunity to see the original Yiddish manuscript. It's being held by the family, but the published English manuscript is fascinating in and of itself. Rachel Kaloff was a mail order bride. So Abraham Kaloff lived on this homestead in upper North Dakota, close to the border of Canada. And he was looking for a wife, and a relative in the old country figured that he found a match, and they mailed pictures back and forth across, along with, I guess, a couple of letters, and then that was that. He sent for her, and he went to New York to pick her up, and they came back on via train until the last stop, and they took a horse and buggy. And the way she describes arriving at her new scene, she was just literally crying for days. And that experience is not unique. In fact, there's a gal, Sophie Truppen, who also had, here's a picture of the book that she wrote, and I'll come back to her later on. Sophie Truppen wrote that her father headed out to North Dakota as a homesteader, and on the opposite end of the state, on the western end. And while her mother and her stayed in Chicago. In the meantime, Chicago had plumbing and electricity, but by the time her father had sweated his way out hard enough to build a homestead for himself, and he called for his wife and daughter to come live with them. And for him, this was the work of his hands. It was his castle, his palace. He had put so much sweat and labor into it. And in the meantime, his wife and daughter were coming from a nice, civilized Chicago, and they're coming out to live in this, ramshackle hut that their father put together. So, as she describes in the book, it didn't necessarily make for a very warm family relationship, but it is what it is, and they weathered it out. And again, it's a very interesting look into that time and part of the experience. Part of the experience, and part of the legacy that the Jewish homesteaders in North Dakota left is a number of Jewish homesteader cemeteries. So this one, for example, this is a rededication that happened a couple of years ago of the Jewish homesteading cemetery in Ashley, North Dakota. Has, I want to say, about 20 graves. And there's another one in Sons of Jacob in Garski County, another one in Reagan, North Dakota, and in Painted Woods. The latter two, their whereabouts are unknown. There's a river called the Painted Woods River in the western end of North Dakota, near the capital in Bismarck. But we have, as of yet, been unable to locate any of the graves from that cemetery. This is that Painted Woods. This is shall you say, an advertisement for that colony, though, the Painted Woods Jewish farmer settlement in Burleigh County. And again, it was short-lived, but it was definitely there. It's a part of North Dakota's history. At one point, a little bit later, the Jewish presence in North Dakota shifted from being primarily homesteaders to merchants. In fact, there are over 200 towns and cities that are known to have a Jewish presence in North Dakota. Here's this This is the agricultural communities. You see Garsky, Wing Reagan, Painted Woods, Bowman County, Flasher, Ashley Wishick, which is where the color picture of the cemetery rededication was. But there's a list of names that a certain priest, William Sherman, put together. He put together names of, again, over 200 Jewish people that lived in different towns around North Dakota at the turn of the century. So it's fascinating. There was really a wealth of Jewish history in the towns and colonies and whatnot. And indeed, in the larger cities as well, Fargo, Bismarck, Grand Forks, and Minot primarily, but also in Dickinson and a couple of smaller places. There were communities to the point that there were rabbis. In fact, there was a great Talmudic scholar, Rabbi Benjamin Papermaster. There's a picture of him right here. This is him with his sons, rabbi and sons. We talked before about a mail order bride. This was a mail order rabbi. He was a student of Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan Spector, the Kovno Magid. And a letter came from North Dakota. Piecing together the bits and pieces of history, it seems that the letter was sent by some family members in Fargo who were trying to convince their family over the pond, as they say, to join them in North Dakota. And they say, we have such a vibrant Jewish community here, we even need a rabbi. So instead of just taking the letter and saying, oh, let's come to North Dakota, they saw the part that the community needs a rabbi. They brought the letter to Rabbi Spector. And Rabbi Spector said, wow, there's a whole community in the United States that doesn't have a rabbi. Let's send a rabbi. So he took one of his choicest students, one that knew how to do everything. He was a chazan and a moel and a shochet. And he said, look, there's a community that needs a rabbi. Why don't you pick yourself up and go? And Rabbi Benjamin Papermaster did. He moved over. He came to Fargo to check it out. And unfortunately, he came to Fargo. Fargo was a very German Jewish community, and he came from a Lithuanian background, and they didn't like him. They said, we don't need a rabbi. I don't know what happened, who even sent the letter. Basically, he was very dejected. But before he headed out, somebody said, you know what, you should go check out the community in Grand Forks. Grand Forks is about 70 miles north of Fargo. And he headed up there, and he came there before Passover. So the story goes that, first of all, the community there was a Russian community, and they were able to get along with the Lithuanian rabbi much better than the Germans did. And what's the story? What happened that the community he broke in the rabbi basically on the night of the Seder. So he led the services in their makeshift synagogue, and then they headed over to the Greenberg's home for the community Seder. And he's sitting there waiting, and they're waiting for him, and he's waiting for them. Nobody knows what anyone is waiting for. Eventually, somebody comes up to him and says, "What are you waiting for?" He says, "I don't know. I'm waiting for you guys to tell me to start." He said. So they asked him. They said, "You don't need a fancy fur hat." And he said, "What fancy fur hat do you have? If you don't have one, we'll do the Seder without it." And they said, "Wow, this is a cool rabbi." And by the time the night was over, word had spread around the entire town that this was a good guy and they were keeping him. And indeed, he stayed until the end of his life, and he's buried in Grand Forks. In fact, here's a picture of his great-great-grandson, Rabbi Shalom Ber Ornstein, visiting the caver of his great-great-grandfather in Grand Forks a couple years back. A couple interesting stories with the Rabbi Papermaster, in addition to that, is so he used to travel around, and he used to visit the different homesteading communities and the other communities that didn't have a rabbi, and he would perform services, whether it was a bris or whether it was whenever he would come, he would shecht as well. So it happened often that he would find himself staying over the night in a Gentile's house near the train, and he could take the train the next day back to Grand Forks or whatnot. So one morning he wakes up in a Gentile farmer's house, and he sees the lady of the house wearing tefillin. And so he asks them, what's going on? The tefillin are the prayer boxes typically worn by Jewish men in daily prayer. What is this? She said, well, there was a passing salesman who was wearing them. He stayed in our house, and I asked him what they're for. And he said, well, it's for my rheumatism. And I had rheumatism, so I bought them from him. So Rabbi Papermaster says, well, you know what? They're really not for rheumatism. They're a prayer box. I'll be happy to buy them back from you. But the woman wouldn't part with them. She said, what can I do? It works. That's the story. There's another interesting story. In fact, there's a newspaper article that can be found about it online. It's barely legible, but it tells the story of they built a mikvah. Every Jewish community needs a mikvah. And they built a mikvah in Grand Forks. And I guess there were different factions within the community, or there were different, every community has that, right? Or there are different people. In any case, there was one guy who put a lock on the mikvah, and he said that all the proceeds of the mikvah should go to me. Whatever. So someone comes to use the mikvah, and there's a lock on the mikvah. So they go to the rabbi, and the rabbi goes to the locksmith, and they go together to take the lock off. In the meantime, this guy who thought that he was the owner of the mikvah showed up. And so they're all standing there, and the rabbi is telling the locksmith, cut the lock off. And the guy who thought he was the owner of the mikvah said, you know what, I'm gonna beat if you cut the lock off, I'm gonna beat you up. So the rabbi said, if you beat me up, I'm gonna have to defend myself. So the guy ran huffing and puffing to the police. And there was a court case. And the rabbi was acquitted, and it went in the paper. It's funny what incidents you'll find. Of course, now that it's in the paper, it's recorded for eternity. You can find it in the archives of the Grand Forks Herald from 100 some years ago. Talking about mikvah, there's a building in Fargo that was built by a lady named Lena Koppelman. You can see the building here has the name Koppelman on it. Lena Koppelman was, how do we get this out? Okay. Lena Koppelman, her husband passed away, and she needed a way to make a living. And so she took the proceeds from the life insurance, and she went to the bank, and she said, I want to open a woman's accessory store. And they said, we don't give loans to women. We can't really help you here. Again, this is this was in the, at the turn of the century. Well, she walked out of that bank with a loan. She was pretty adamant, and they gave it to her. And she built this store. And what's more fascinating than that is that in the basement of her store, evidently, she built a mikvah. And so this is a contract, between her and the Fargo Hebrew congregation about building what they call here a plunge bath, and that every Hebrew woman of Fargo may pay the amount of $1 for every time they use said plunge bath, et cetera, et cetera. You can read the whole contract. You can find it online. And yeah, so that was before they built the mikvah in the basement of Fargo's Hebrew congregation shul, which sadly was destroyed by a flood and then it was torn down. I had the opportunity about a year and a half ago to speak with the grandson of Mrs. Koppelman. And actually, here's a picture of him with a Chabad rabbi in Florida where he lived. And the Chabad rabbi, there was an article about this mikvah in the Fargo Forum, and literally the next day I get this picture from the rabbi in Florida saying, do you know this person? He says his grandmother built a mikvah in Fargo. And he says his name is Arthur Koppelman. So imagine that, the very day after the article ran in the Fargo paper. And with God, hang on. Over here, this is what we think may have been filled in cement, may have been what the mikvah is. But Arthur told me he remembers the mikvah being there in the basement of his mother's store when he was a child. And hopefully we'll build a new mikvah in Fargo. We're actually in the process of getting construction bids, and so we'll yet bring the mikvah back to North Dakota. But we would be remiss if we spoke about mikvah in North Dakota without going back to Sophie Trupin, who we said wrote this memoir of her homesteading years. So evidently, her father, among the different things that he built on the ranch or on the homestead, obviously they kept on improving it as they went along. One of the things that he built was a mikvah pool. And there's a very powerful message that she wrote in her book, which I'll share momentarily. But her brother, many years later, came back to look and see if there was anything left of the farm. And so here's where she writes it, and I'll read it. Many years later, my eldest brother went back to the old homestead to see what was left of it. The house and barn and windmill were gone without a trace. There was no sign that anyone had lived and worked there. None of the dwellings of our three neighbors were there. The prairie was the same, the hills and valleys and gullies. Haystack Butte, the large hill overlooking the stretch of empty landscape, still stood as a sentinel. My brother searched for some sign, some little token of his first home in this new land. As he walked about on the rise of the hill where our house with its sod roof had stood, he found in the prairie grass the cement outline of the old mikvah. Embedded in the earth was a reminder that here old world Jews had brought with them a bit of their ancient civilization. So here you have in the middle of North Dakota, just prairie land, grasses, and in the earth of the country is this cement mikvah. Really, I think for me that's a very powerful message depicting the Jewish continuity and the Jewish impact on the state. A couple other interesting things we have here is Herman Stern. Where's Herman Stern? Right here. Here's a picture of Herman Stern. Herman Stern was a businessman, a very well-known businessman in about, I guess, 70 years ago in North Dakota. And he founded the Greater North Dakota Chamber of Commerce, the North Dakota Winter Show. He was instrumental in the development of the interstate highway system in North Dakota. He was very influential. In fact, so influential was he that he was able to work together with arch isolationists, Senator Nye of North Dakota, who did not want the United States to be involved in the war, but nevertheless, he needed the graces of this businessman, Mr. Stern, and they were able to together send visas for over 140 people from Germany towards the beginning of the war that they should come over to the United States. And then these people, obviously, you know, they built families. Every one of them was, as the Talmud states, an entire world, an olam maleh. And so that's a very, you know, here in North Dakota, who would have thought there was somebody that, here's another picture of Herman Stern. And here's a passport photo. This is the passport photo of Felix Steiner. This is his German passport. Here it is. You can see the Nazi stamp, stamping his visa that he was allowed out. And here is his United States naturalization. And again, his passport allowing him entry into the United States. And him and his family live in his descendants live now in the Twin Cities in Minneapolis. And they were saved along with many other people by this Herman Stern. another interesting thing that Herman Stern was involved in at the beginning of Israel. There's a picture, and we don't have much information about this, but the sign on the rail car is tells us kind of what's going on. There's another picture which depicts a sack of flour. This was a rail car's worth of flour. Flour is one of North Dakota's primary exports. And you can see there are two, I don't know if you can see over here, there are two Israeli soldiers, a man and a woman in uniform, that came to receive this rail car of flour being sent to the fledgling country, fledgling of Israel, as was just getting started. So it's a great deal of philanthropy and care, and Herman Stern was involved in this as well, as you can imagine. What else did we want to cover over here? Rosh Hashanah is coming up. On Rosh Hashanah, we do Tashlich. This is a fascinating photo. And if you can read the Yiddish handwriting on the bottom, it says, Minot congregation, gehen zu Tashlich, Shnas Tafresh Samach Ches. It's 1907 Tashlich service, Minot, North Dakota. So this is a 120-year-old photo of the Jewish community in North Dakota's fourth largest or third largest city. And I think with that, I'll pause for some questions. And if there's if there are any other interesting stories that come up, I'll throw them in as we come up to them.
Well, that's really fascinating, Rabbi Grossman. So how many Jews would you say live in North Dakota today?
So today the official estimate is 450 to 500 Jews. And one of the things about the Jewish community of North Dakota is that it's very transient. From what we've found in the past 10 years that we've been here, people come and go. It's not a very popular retirement spot for the Jewish community, as you might imagine, with freezing winters and shorter summers, and it's pretty much flat as a pancake. So people come for business. People come for, we have a number of people who have come through to do medical internships, for example, and even people who move in and they stay for a number of years. That I would say that there are other people that move out.
And maybe you can tell us about some of the things that you have going on or that you're planning to have go on. You mentioned already the mikveh. Do you have the people who are there? What is available to them in terms of Jewish education, in terms of kosher food? Tell us about your activities.
Sure. So I'll start by saying that our motto in North Dakota is that every Jew is a diamond. And I think it really, when you live in a place like Chicago, where my parents live, and so I know that you all are primarily from the Chicago area. We were just there visiting, as Rabbi Jaworowski mentioned. It's easy for people to slip between the cracks, but here in North Dakota, it's very hard. I mean, it's easy for people to go unnoticed, but once they're noticed, for me, as a Chabad rabbi, there's no way we can let them down. That having been said, there are no regular services. And again, people come and go. So we have an arrangement with the kosher store in Minneapolis, that people can make orders. And every few weeks there's someone going back and forth, and someone will pick up the order for different people, whoever needs it, bring it to Fargo, and from here we'll give it to those people who order, or send it on further to the different cities and communities. We have holiday programs for, services for Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. We walk around with the shofar around town. We drive around the state with a sukkah mobile on Sukkot, and on Hanukkah we drive around. There are two Air Force bases. There are two major Air Force bases in the state, and so we make sure to visit those as well for the Jewish airmen. And I think beyond that, it's there are some classes that we give either in person or on Zoom, but beyond that, it's mainly about being here for people, relationships one-on-one. And you know what, even for the non-Jewish community, I actually got a phone call yesterday from the hospital asking if I could come and provide some end-of-life care for a family at the hospital, and I did not recognize the name. And I came and I realized that this was somebody who was an employee of a kosher factory that I visit on occasion. And he was not Jewish, and he requested a rabbi, or his family requested that a rabbi come. So I was there. I was able to be there with them for, those very important moments. And yeah, I guess you could say our mission is to promote Jewish pride, study, and celebration.
Rabbi Jay, can you hear me?
Yes, I do.
This is your new student, Noah Hoffman, coming live from the beautiful library at the Chicago Mitzvah Campaign. I just want to thank the emissary from North Dakota for his really fascinating presentation. And if I just might say a couple of quick words, I would like to say that for a number of years, I've led a major international research project, which one of the themes, without going into detail, is connects Jewish history to Native North American history. And I have very strong connections in the Native American community, maybe even stronger than the Jewish community, but I'm working on that part of it. And I would just like we have a rich history of connecting the Jewish community with the Native American community, which has a very strong presence in North Dakota. And someone who has some familiarity with my work, though we don't know each other personally, is Rabbi Levertov in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I'm very well known in the Native American, especially in the arts community in New Mexico. And to be brief, I just want to say to you, I wish you a lot of luck in your work. And my only advice that I could give you towards making it a big success, which I believe you will do, is that if you somehow, through your work, make an effort to connect with Indigenous people in North Dakota, that it will give you a great many new avenues of planting roots in the community there, and will educate North American Native Americans about your work, as you will find they will be interested in what you're about. And this includes the concept of land acknowledgement, of where they are from and whose land that originally belonged to, and what have you. And I'm not saying that's an easy thing, but it only takes one individual contact initially. It could be someone more with an urban background in Bismarck. It could be in one of the very large reservations. But I'm not asking you to start a outreach program to Native Americans, but somehow within your work, just to think about that idea. I think it will add a whole new dimension to your work there. And that's all I can say. I've been involved with this type of work for over 25 years, almost 25 years now. And, we had a Jewish governor of the Acoma Pueblo in New Mexico named Solomon Bilbo. So I'm not asking you to become chairman of a tribe out there. You have your own tribe. But anyway, that's my thought. So
that's very, very interesting. I didn't know that about you now, but that's very interesting. Does anyone have any questions about the Jewish community in North Dakota?
Yeah, I'd like to know if you have a Jewish community in South Dakota.
Yes.
How many Jewish people live there?
The estimates are about the same, about 450 to 500. When we first moved here, we were serving the Jewish community of South Dakota as well. But since then, we've opened up a separate office there. And so Rabbi Alperowitz is serving the South Dakota Jewish community.
I'd like to ask a question.
Please.
This Herman Stern,
Yep.
are you in touch with any of his descendants?
I have been in touch with them. There were a couple of grandsons of his that owned a store here in Fargo, but they've since retired.
Okay, it was a very interesting story.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are there any children, any day schools, any summer camps for children?
Not at present. It's a very, I guess it's a very small and spread out Jewish community. I'll tell you something. I got a call. We're always finding out about no Jewish people. I got a call about a month ago, maybe 2 months by now, from the VA, from the Veterans Administration Hospital, and they said there's somebody who's requesting a Jewish chaplain. And I called him, and it turns out he's a Jewish veteran that lives 2 hours west of Fargo. And it's a small town of about 100 people, maybe less. And he's the solitary Jew. And we sent the student. We had student rabbis at the time in North Dakota that are visiting each summer, and so we sent them over, and they had a visit with him, and he was very uplifted. And we will maintain contact with him with God's help. But yeah, one here, one there. That's our community.
Remarkable. And my eyebrows lifted just to hear about a town that has 100 people as the population.
Yeah.
It's quite remarkable. It hardly qualifies as a town at all.
Yeah, well, here it does.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
You mentioned before Native Americans. There are a couple of, and you mentioned the Jewish chairman of the tribe. There's actually a couple of Jewish Native Americans that there was a Jewish lady who many years ago married somebody who became the chairman of his tribe, and so their children, as you understand, are all Jewish. And so I had the opportunity to meet a couple of them. We put up a menorah in front of the Chabad house this past Hanukkah, and we left it up. And as I was fiddling with the menorah, putting it up, this guy passes by and he says, "Hey, what's that?" And so I figured I'll explain to him. I said, "It's a menorah. It's a Jewish symbol." And before I really get a chance to explain what it is, he says, "I know what that is. My name is Chaim." What was his last name? It was a Jewish last name, Goldstein. It's not his actual last name, but just in his privacy, it was a name that was like that. It was really Jewish. And he's like, "Yeah, I'm from New Jersey. I've been living here for 10 years." And, since then we've been in touch, and we've had the opportunity to put on tefillin and whatnot. In the beginning, when we came here, I was asking people, "Excuse me, are you Jewish?" Especially if they had a Jewish sounding name. At some point I stopped doing that, and when the guy who had a plaque on his office saying Leonard Schmaltz, and he couldn't figure out what on earth would make me think that he's Jewish. Schmaltz is a German name. It's a German name. So, Silbernagel is a very common name here, not Jewish at all. So now primarily we meet Jews by word of mouth. I was riding in the taxi one day shortly after that, and I'm talking with the taxi driver, and of course I don't even ask him if he's Jewish anymore, because I know he's probably not. And I mentioned, I'm a rabbi and this and that, and all of a sudden he throws out, he says, "Rabbi, since I joined the army, I haven't kept kosher." I've never been happy to hear somebody say the words, I don't keep kosher, but here I met a new Jewish person, and we developed a very close relationship, and then we stayed in touch until recently we moved out of town. But again, it's one neshama at a time. one mitzvah at a time.
Something.
Does anyone else have any questions? If you're on the phone, you can unmute yourself by pressing star and then 6.
Is that what you did?
I have a comment. I think it would be a good idea. Should you have a unique piece of history to establish a genealogic database that would be interesting for you to keep
Yeah.
track of all of these people and different things, because that would be of great interest.
Yeah,
other thing
no,
I
it would be
want-
fascinating. That's something I'd like to. I'd like to start a North Dakota Jewish history project at some point.
Well, why don't you?
Hopefully, we will soon.
The other thing that I think was important to think about is how is all of this being impacted by the fracking and the use of natural resources?
Here's an interesting thing about the fracking and of course the resultant protesting of the oil pipeline. So when they were doing not first, I guess about what's almost 5 years ago right now, they had the big protests by the pipeline, and understandably there were a lot of Jewish people that were supposed, people told me, you should go there. There are probably lots of Jews there, protesting, whatnot. And, we have to be so careful at Chabad to stay out of anything that could be seen as political, because we don't want to alienate anybody.
Yeah.
So I wasn't sure, what should I do? I should go, I shouldn't go. And then I got a phone call from somebody in law enforcement. He said, I'm a Jewish officer from Colorado, and I was sent to help out at the protests. Could you come help us, by providing a Shabbat service or something? So I didn't. A big snowstorm came, and I didn't end up going. But it was interesting to me to see that, there were Jews at the protests, and they were on both sides. They were from the law enforcement, and they were from the protesters. And you know what? If I would have gone there, they probably would have sat down together at a Shabbos meal, and no one would have known. I mean, or they would have known, but we would have been talking about Shabbos, so it would have been okay.
Okay, well, Rabbi Grossman, maybe you can tell us a little bit about how you came to take up the post in North Dakota.
That's interesting. Okay, to me, it's interesting anyway. I was actually studying accounting when there was the terrorist attack in Mumbai, in which a Chabad rabbi and his wife were murdered. And I felt that I needed to do something, take on some sort of a real resolution in order to, internalize that. And it took a few months, but the resolution that I took was to follow in his footsteps and to go and, to find some Jewish community that was underserved and move out there to serve the community. And so my wife and I were in Chicago, and we were trying to figure out, okay, where are we going to go? And at that time, there was a kosher beef packing plant here in Fargo. And I got a job offer to come work at the packing plant. And I said, and I thought to myself, when the offer came up, I was like, if there's no Chabad presence in North Dakota, which there was not at the time, then there's probably a good reason for that. There's not many Jews out there that need it. But I spoke to the regional Chabad director, and I said, we'd like to set up a Chabad center in a place that needs it. And we were thinking to come to North Dakota. So his first response was, well, we don't have the funds to set up a new center right now in North Dakota. And I said, well, I have a job offer there. So he said, okay, well, come on out. And that's the story. So we came here, and I worked with the kosher packing plant for the first year. And then they folded up and moved out of town, and we stayed.
Amazing. That's quite amazing. Does anyone else have any other questions for Rabbi Grossman? Does the state of North Dakota have any kind of museum or any place where you can study state history that includes the history of the Jewish homesteaders?
Yeah, there are a number of oral. For starters, there's an oral history project that part of which has been transcribed. That's at the state library in the capital. There's also one of the tombstones that we believe is from the Painted Woods Jewish Cemetery is there, but we don't have much more information on it. Just it's there. There was a museum here in Fargo that did an exhibit, and which we collaborated with them on the Jewish history of North Dakota. That exhibit lasted for about 2 years. Otherwise, it's bits and pieces here and there. You know, there's the university libraries each have their collection, which includes the Jewish history and photographs and artifacts.
Very fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Rabbi Grossman. We want to wish you, first of all, a Ksivah V'Chsima Tova and a Shana Tova. Should be a good and sweet year with health and happiness and lots of success in every way. And it's been a real pleasure getting to know the community a little more, the history and the contemporary activities. And you should go from strength to strength in all of your holy work. God willing, maybe one day we'll meet again in probably in Chicago, but maybe maybe at some point in North Dakota, but hopefully, and most importantly, in Jerusalem, in the holy city, with the coming of Mashiach, it should be very speedily in our days.
Amen. Amen. Thank you very much. Wishing everyone here a Ksivah V'Chsima Tova, a sweet new year. And yes, next year in Jerusalem, and then next year starts very soon. We don't have to wait till then, though.
Okay. Take everyone. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time. Bye for now.